MiCA, what does this mean for startups?
Fantastic, I've been cued in. Hello everyone, how is everybody in the room? Hey, can you just raise your hand and see if you're still alive? Woo, fantastic, a little bit of energy. So, I would like to start very quickly because I'm sure you have had plenty of panels about MiCA, but this is gonna be the best one. So, a quick round of introduction, starting with Elle.
I'm Eleanor Bodo, and I'm a lawyer and a consultant from London.
Yeah, quickly, my name is Liudas. I'm the CEO and the co-founder at Ondato, the KYC guy.
Ian Dawson, CEO, co-founder of ZBX, classical digital asset platform in Malta.
Eran, Shay, based in Gibraltar, heading up a company called Benefit Business Solutions, in which we assist crypto companies, gaming companies, and other financial service companies to get regulated and get the license from the Gibraltar financial regulator.
Fantastic. Thank you. My name is Mario. I'm honored to be the moderator here. I'm head of event and community at SwissBorg. It's a crypto wealth management app headquartered in Switzerland. So, long story short, let's get to the chase, shall we? Let's start with an educated guess. When do you think MiCA will get into force?
So whilst MiCA has been around since 2020, the initial draft was just submitted last month, in which case we've got about 12 months to be implemented in 2024, but it's still open to commentary from the industry experts. And then it will need to be imposed in individual European countries. So I'd say about 2024 plus probably another year or so.
Sounds pretty much good. Do you think... Hello? Okay, you go. You guys hear me? Okay, perfect. Do you think this would open up some legislation arbitrage, for example?
Potentially, but I think it probably will do... I think it's more of harmonization as opposed to sort of an adverse impact. So I think, of course, there'll be cases where there may be some arbitrage, depending on the jurisdiction in question. So we can't rule that out, but I think it will do more good than harm, hopefully.
Hopefully. This is a very good point. Maybe I can go back to Liudas. So could you give us an example, for the legislation in Lithuania?
Yeah, sure. So, you know that legislation is also discussed here. Like the legislation is already in place and in some jurisdictions. And in example, Lithuania, like starting from November 1st, like this month, when of course there is, like an impact on the ecosystem itself, yeah, because you know that Lithuania is a financial, like one of the financial hubs in Europe. We have lots of activity there, including the crypto companies registered, like more than 400 basically reported, you know, with the crypto activity. And of course, the newer license coming, it has its own effect, yeah. So, but what is obvious now that you know, those proper ones, like bigger ones, or with a sustainable business model stays. And does the business just register themselves, acquires the license and operates. And the rest ones are looking for other type of jurisdictions where they can actually then operate from, while they will be again in the same loop what they have today.
A good point, actually. Thank you for queuing actually Eran in, because that's Eran could bring in the perspective of Gibraltar, right? Because after Brexit, now you're extra EU kind of jurisdiction. So how is it in Gibraltar?
Right, so first, for those of you who don't know, Gibraltar exited the EU together with the UK, being a British overseas territory. Unfortunately, even though 97% of us there voted to remain in Europe, we had to leave the EU as we are part of the UK in that aspect. But regardless, the Gibraltar has already bespoke DLT regulatory framework already back in 2018, was one of the pioneering jurisdictions in that regard. And the regulatory framework in Gibraltar is more principles-based. It has based on 10 principles rather than having a much more fixed and rigid approach as MiCA is. I think one of the differences that we will see once MiCA is implemented, for those companies who don't want to be prefer not to be regulated under MiCA, Gibraltar framework would provide them an adequate, even some would say a gold-plated regulatory framework to work in an environment which is much more on a case-by-case basis rather than a rigid approach, right? These are the amounts, these are your capital adequacy requirements, and these are the minimum reserves that you should be keeping, as MiCA is suggesting. So it's a much more flexible approach, and it's also important to remember that Gibraltar is the only jurisdiction in the world, actually, that has automatic passporting to the UK. After Brexit, countries like Malta and other jurisdictions that beforehand were more had the ability to passport to the UK, that has finished for them. Gibraltar, as the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission and the UK FCA have signed an agreement so that there is automatic passporting. So for those of you looking to enter the UK market, but doing it through a more kind of user-friendly jurisdiction, Gibraltar would definitely be the one.
Sounds really good, actually. But it cues into the topic of harmonization that Ellen once said before. I actually have a question because the panel is focused on startup, right? So usually when you start, you're basically a scrappy founder, cash strapped, and there are maybe two approaches here. Whether, move fast and break things, right? Or, let's say, building with compliance and regulation in mind. And that's, I think, a question for Ian. Welcome. What would you suggest to, let's say, a new founders for startups? Which would be the best approach considering that MiCA is coming?
Well, I joked earlier, I said just get a license. But I think in reality, it really is subject to the type of business model that you're operating. So you can't just get a license if you DeFi, right? So it really is dependent on where you're starting off. My background before ZBX was actually a consulting firm in Malta with startups. So corporate service provision, everything from growing the business, finance, and etc. And it's actually how I was introduced to ZBX, and I actually worked for free for the first year of ZBX in exchange for shares. So that's how I actually got involved at ZBX, and we grew ZBX from there. So, but I think you can do both. I think you can break things, but in a controlled fashion. It's like, have a little room on the side, give your baseball bat, have your vases, go and smash things, but it's in controlled, testing environment kind of situation, rather than go and break laws. We can't obviously promote that.
We can't do that. Absolutely. I think we are pro-regulation. But you open up an interesting point of view, because the legislation could both be considered as an enabler or as a set of constraints, right? So Liudas, for example, what if you would talk about from the point of view of constraints, what the MiCA could actually entail for startup founders?
So, as discussed, so the startup wants to move fast, quick, and a bit of in a freestyle, and then that kind of, but the constraints are that, okay, so first of all, you have to form a capital, which is sometimes for the startup in the beginning, it might be quite a big one. Yeah. Then, of course, you have to form a team with, compliance officers, management team and everything. And of course, to ensure the reporting and everything, which means that you have to still build an infrastructure that is not related to the actual business that you will be doing. Yeah, so that is kind of the constraint. But also then it has the other side of that, because it helps actually to do the business. And in today's environment, is that just you must do that because you still want to be a reliable partner for your partners, banking rails, whatever, and your consumers, users, and the market itself.
It's a very good point, actually. Thank you for bringing it up. Ellen, what about the enabler? What, from a point of view, from a legal perspective, I think legislation could be a very strong enabler, right? So at least fostering business opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes it could be considered onerous because you've got to do all your licensing, making sure that you've got your conflicts of interest managed, looking at creating an entire framework. However, I think future-proofing is very beneficial, and also, doing things in advance and making sure that you're compliant, I think, sort of makes you seem much more trusted and reliable and responsible, and therefore attracting investors and particularly foreign investment. So I think I would go, I'd say that it's more of an enabler.
Absolutely, go for it.
If I can add, I think the regulation also assists companies to become much more self-disciplined. It helps them to have a proper corporate governance structure, have policies and procedures in place, which they may have not had it before. and that can then open the door to form more relationships with partners, with suppliers, with other service providers that may be more willing to work with you, given that you are regulated and follow those procedures. And
I'd have to agree as well. I think, where ZBX sits in currently and where we are right now today, we only can provide services because we're regulated and because we have access to banking. So think of it like, as an environment, and if you act against your environment, the environment will reject you. Yeah. So if you're running around this room smacking people around, you're going to get removed from the room. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. Yeah.
I think it also has a certain dimension of risk attached to it. So you're basically shielding yourself from potential future risk. Now, having said, this has got very interesting. I got a question that maybe is more like an open consideration. Like, for example, in lieu of the fact that, MiCA is coming and whatever it happens in 2024, it will happen. But do you think that the European Union, in that sense, is setting as a form of a trailblazer from a regulator point of view, or will become a place more hostile for startups? Because, for example, what Liudas said before, there might be like increased threshold to actually enter the market for a startup, right? So what my panel thinks?
Tricky. My gut's telling me that things are going to catapult and go really well over the next few years. That's my gut, for multiple different reasons. But yeah, it's challenging to start up. I mean, you've got to have a good idea. You've got to be well financed. You've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. So if you're good at tech, look at SBF. He's really good at tech. But what did he know about the world? And it's proven that he didn't have that experience. So if you're building a whole framework, you need treasury management, you need risk management, you need AML, you need all of these things. Be honest with yourself as a tech person, do you know anything about that? So you have to bring in experts, subject matter experts, and the grey hairs. I'm almost going grey, so I'm getting to that level, but I was 40 last week, but those are the type, you need people who have been through certain experiences, right?
Cool. Eran, from a point of view from extra EU instead, you think it's going to become more or less hostile to startups?
Personally, I think that for a start, companies that are, the EU is a too big market to ignore. So if you want to be in that marketplace, you have to be MiCA compliant at the end of the day. Nevertheless, I think there are, if you are looking for other markets like the UK or for other markets beyond Europe, into Africa, which is also up and coming, then perhaps places like Gibraltar could be ideal for you. Nevertheless, I think that over time, both Gibraltar would also harmonize its regulatory framework to be very similar to the EU, to MiCA. We've seen it before. Gibraltar was outside the EU. It had exactly the same directives as the rest of the EU. And even now, after leaving the EU, it's still on insurance, on some other financial services. It makes sure that its standards are the same as that of the EU. So I guess there would be some harmonization there. But if you want to be in the EU, then you have to bite the bullet and be compliant, yeah.
Amen to that. Liudas, so what do you think about the single market trailblazing for startups? Will we become more attractive?
So it will, and it will happen that the regulation will be standardized and harmonized for sure. Yeah. So all the day, all those discussions and panels and keynotes were about that. The market needs to be regulated. Yeah. So and everyone was just repeating that all the day. Yeah. So and the market itself is pushing for that, and then for sure that even this relationship with the banking and partners and whatever is also pushing for that. So then everyone wants to be a member of a club, and that's it. Yeah. So for sure it will be harmonized, standardized. And even Gibraltar will push, the requirements on the capital and then whatever. So I'm sure about that.
For sure. Ellen, some closing remarks on this?
I agree with the rest of the panel in terms of harmonisation and standardisation being key, and markets transparency, and an amalgamation of all the European countries coming together to really set the tone for crypto and crypto assets, etc. So, yeah.
I think we all kind of agree that the safest approach would be actually be prepared for a legislation that is about to come anyway. So that's probably the most future-proof approach. So, and with that said, I think we just ran out of time. So I would like to thank all of my panel. Thank you for being here. Thank you in this lovely and our audience. It's been a pleasure. Speak soon.